She was a beautiful young woman with a heart that was just as radiant.
She wanted to be a model originally, but decided that she wanted to be a nurse.
She had this loving, caring heart.
And when she met someone who shared her same positive outlook on life, sparks flew.
He was confident, fun, and friendly.
When she found out that she was pregnant, she was super excited.
Janelle was a wonderful mother.
But when she goes missing, there's immediate fears of foul play.
Because it's really not like her to go without communicating with someone in the family.
I'm like, man, something's not right, something's not right.
We knew that something had to be wrong.
Police will have to follow a winding trail of breadcrumbs to get to the truth.
She was looking for something new, something fresh to get away from her past.
There's no point in us being apart. We might as well just continue to grow and make this a family.
Can they find the missing mother before it's too late?
We found some things that just simply don't add up.
He's got this now. Oh, you think?
They were sworn mortal enemies.
She took things to a whole nother level.
They said, you're not telling us the full story.
They found blood.
Dear God.
July 19th, 2010. It's a sweltering summer day in College Park, Georgia, a buzzing community just south of Atlanta.
In the summertime, we're talking hot. I mean, they don't call it hot Atlanta by accident.
College Park in July is lively, very lively. It's kind of like almost the end of summer. So it's like that last bit of rush of just wanting to do everything and be outside.
At 10:30 a.m., 22-year-old Aisha Davis is trying to stay cool in the summer heat when she receives an unexpected phone call.
Hey, Arrow, what's up?
The call is from Errol Moore, who shares a 5-month-old daughter with Aisha's sister, Janelle Aaron.
He called me and he proceeded to ask me had I spoken to my sister, Janelle. And I told him that no, I hadn't spoken to her.
No, is everything okay?
I'm not sure.
He was worried because he hadn't spoken to her all weekend.
He stated that he called her multiple times on the phone and that she never answered the phone.
I mean, every time I try, it goes straight to voicemail.
Let me try to give her a call.
I hung up with him and then I tried to reach her and I couldn't. And that's what began my worry.
Hey, it's Janelle. I can't get to the phone right now. Leave a message.
Hey, Janelle, give me a call when you get this.
Janelle was pretty tight with her extended family. She talked to them often.
Because it's really not like her to go missing without communicating with someone in the family for days.
So once I reached out to our family and friends, we realized that no one was able to get in contact or had spoken to Janelle in over 4 days.
We knew something was wrong.
Despite a challenging upbringing, 20-year-old Janelle Aaron always kept a positive outlook on life.
We grew up in family and foster care and custody of different family members. It was pretty much her and I against the world. But Janelle was very vibrant. She loved to make people laugh. She loved to what we call roast and joke. Her smile, her presence, she let you know she was here.
We met in high school around 10th grade. She was funny, feisty, really nice, kind, loyal, ride or die.
Janelle was also a dreamer with big plans for her future.
She was into fashion, a fashionista, I would say.
She wanted to be a model originally, but as she got older, Janelle decided that she wanted to be a nurse because she loved taking care of people. She had a knack for making people feel comfortable, making people feel safe.
She had this loving, caring heart, and she wanted to give back.
She was seeking a degree in healthcare into nursing. to pursue her final career.
It was around that time Janelle met a fellow student, Errol Moore.
Hey, I think I seen you in class.
Yeah, it's Mr. Gibson's class, right?
Yeah, I'm Errol.
Janelle.
You mind if I sit?
Of course, you can sit down.
He was confident, and Janelle really gravitated towards that.
So, I'm hanging out with some friends after classes this afternoon. You wanna come?
Sounds good. Sure.
Errol was fun and friendly, and they had lots in common in terms of their upbringing.
Once they started dating, the relationship moved fast.
The couple immediately became inseparable. If you saw one, you saw the other.
And in July of 2009, they received some unexpected news that would change their lives forever.
Janelle was dating Errol for about a year when she found out that she was pregnant. She was super excited. She always wanted to be a mother.
She had a natural maternal instinct. She loved children.
The way we grew up, not having our mother in our life in the capacity in which we wanted it, we always said that when we had children that, we were going to be amazing moms.
In February of 2010, her baby girl arrived.
She was excited and happy that she was finally born. She was very attentive, very caring and loving.
Janelle was a wonderful mother.
Once she had her daughter, that's all that mattered. There was nothing more important or a bigger accomplishment for her or achievement than bringing her daughter into this world.
Errol also took parenthood in stride.
Errol as a father was very invested. He was present. He definitely showed that he loved her and that he was excited that he had a new baby in the world.
But just 5 months after the birth of her daughter, Janelle's family is worried that something terrible has happened to the young mother.
No one has heard from Janelle in about 4 days, and this isn't like her to just disappear.
Janelle would never leave her 5-month-old daughter behind and just abandon her.
We decided to reach out to the police and put in a missing persons report.
In the summer of 2010, Janelle Aaron was making strides to fulfill her dream of working in healthcare.
She entered Georgia Perimeter College, working to be a nurse.
She and her boyfriend, Errol Moore, had just welcomed a baby girl the same year. They had a bright future ahead of them.
But on July 19th, Janelle has gone missing.
No one has heard from Janelle in about 4 days.
We decided to reach out to the police and put in a missing persons report. When we spoke to detectives, we tried to drive into them how we knew that something had to be wrong. Janelle had never been away from her daughter for any long extended amount of time, not even more than 24 hours, let alone multiple days.
What's so tricky for law enforcement is to try to understand, is this the type of lady who would go missing? Is this the type of lady who was exhausted from, those early months? What do we have here? Do we actually have a missing person?
So we understand Janelle's a new mom, so you don't think she might have just been trying to get away for a little while?
Absolutely not. She loves her daughter.
The family reiterated that Janelle would never leave her 5-month-old daughter behind and just abandon her.
She loved that baby girl.
Well, where's Janelle's daughter now?
She's at the house with her father.
Did Janelle seem stressed or upset about anything in the days leading up to her disappearance?
Yeah, she's been in a funk lately.
Janelle had been struggling with some postpartum depression.
Janelle dealt with what a lot of women deal with financially, being able to support your child as well as be present at the same time, which, of course, is hard to deal with for anyone.
But that's not all the young mother had been struggling with recently.
Janelle had hit a rough patch with Errol.
Janelle and Errol's relationship was very on again, off again.
And right now they're off. And she's actually seeing somebody new.
Oh, and who's that?
The family told police about this new guy, Tim Williams. This is somebody that Janelle had started dating.
They were in a new relationship, and she talked about him all the time. She was excited about this new relationship and where it could go.
Y'all spoken with this Tim fellow to see if maybe Janelle's with him?
No, we don't have his contact information.
Ladies, thank you for coming in.
However, detectives quickly tracked Tim down.
After a quick background check, police find out that this Tim Williams worked at a shoe store.
He is a student at Georgia State. He has no criminal background.
Detectives reach out to Tim and ask him to come in for an interview regarding Janelle's disappearance.
I got a phone call from a detective. A detective wanted to see me personally to ask me questions about her whereabouts. And I remember just being shook up.
He's being very compliant and amicable, so he goes into the station for an interview.
Tim, thanks for coming in today.
Of course. Anything I can do to help?
I remember going to the police station and talking to the detectives and just feeling sick.
Now, we're gonna have to ask you some tough questions, okay, Tim?
I'm understanding they have to do their job, but just them asking me certain questions as if like I would know what her whereabouts was, as if I would ever injure anybody but her in particular. How much did I love her? Did I provoke anybody in her circle? Or do I have anybody that's after me that would harm her just to get back at me?
This is all so crazy. I have no idea where she is.
I remember just kind of taking it all in and hitting them with a lot of no sir, yes sir, no sir, yes sir. This is all kind of too much.
I just hope that she's okay. She really means a lot to me.
We just had a spark for each other, like a spark. Like I was really intrigued at how driven she was. Janelle's personality was everything all in once. Like she was so outgoing and bubbly, but she was also a firecracker. And when she loved you, she loved you.
She's just the best mom.
At that time, I didn't have any kids, but I looked at her daughter as mine. Like it wasn't no turning her away from me.
Janelle indicated that she was looking for something new, something fresh to get away from her past. It made Tim believe that whatever she had with Errol is past tense, and that he was going to be the man for her moving forward.
Well, when's the last time you've seen Janelle?
Tim says that the last time he talked to Janelle was the morning of July 15th because she had spent the night with him.
What's you cooking?
The last time I spoke and saw Janelle, I have this day in my head. It runs back and back and back. And I just remember her making grits, eggs, and biscuits for me.
I have it right here for you, honey.
Oh, son. This looks delicious. Thank you, baby.
You're welcome.
Timothy explains that Janelle and her daughter had been planning to move in with him.
Part of the day's plan was for her to gather up her things and come move into the apartment with me. It was to the point where it was like, there's no point of us being apart. We might as well just like continue to grow and make this a family. And like, this is gonna be your new life.
Well, I gotta get over there.
I remember she gave me a hug, I kissed her.
I love you so much.
She left and she told me she would give me a call later on that day to let me know she was on her way back.
However, Tim says he never got that call.
Waited for hours and I heard nothing back.
I got honestly concerned, so I called the phone. She didn't pick up.
Later on that evening, Tim finally got a response, but it only raised more cause for concern.
I got a text message back that said, "Who is this?" So I knew that was a concerning point. I was like, I need to go over to this crib that she said she was going to. It was a place that she was sharing with her old ex-boyfriend. I need to go see, make sure everything's okay.
But when Tim went over to the apartment, he didn't find Janelle, her daughter, or Errol.
No one was home as far as I can tell.
Went out there with some childhood friends of mine, and we knocked on the door. We banged on the door because I just had to know she was okay. Nobody ever answered. Tried to peek through the window, didn't see anything.
Well, how does Errol feel about Janelle moving in with you?
Not good. Jealous?
There definitely seemed to be some jealousy issues there. I think Errol viewed the situation as if Tim was trying to take over his family.
But Tim claims Janelle had good reason to leave.
Tim told detectives that he heard Errol had been violent with Janelle in the past.
She didn't tell me a lot of details, but that's part of the reason that she didn't want to be with him anymore.
This information raises red flags for detectives.
If Errol had been violent with Janelle in the past, was it possible that he took things too far?
But before detectives can reach out to Errol, they receive an alarming phone call that will turn the case on its head.
Police get this call from the apartment manager where Janelle lived.
The property manager said, I think y'all want to be aware of this.
They found blood.
In July of 2010, detectives have spoken with Timothy Williams about the disappearance of his girlfriend, 20-year-old Janelle Aaron.
In speaking with Timothy, detectives learned that Janelle was planning to move out of her apartment with her ex, Errol Moore, and start a new life with him.
But that new life never came to fruition.
Timothy claims that after Janelle left his apartment the morning of the 14th to gather her things, he never heard from her again.
And now, detectives have received an alarming phone call from Janelle's apartment complex.
Police get this call from the apartment manager. They had been preparing to lease out her apartment. They had cleaned it out and everything.
And the property manager said, I think y'all want to be aware of this.
They found blood underneath the carpet in the apartment.
Thank you for your time, Tim.
Is everything okay?
We'll be in touch.
Walk out.
The discovery was made during a routine carpet cleaning.
As the carpet cleaner is, of course, cleaning the carpet, the machinery he uses is applying steam to that area. And as that steam hits, blood starts to come up.
Detectives head to the apartment to view the shocking new blood evidence for themselves.
The padding that was underneath the original carpet was soaked completely in blood, and the wooden subfloor directly underneath that was also soaked completely in blood.
Whoever was at that spot where that stain was starting was bleeding a lot.
And that became the very first sign, beyond their hunch, that we had wrongdoing here, that there was some foul play.
Now more than ever, detectives are eager to speak with Errol Moore. And later that afternoon, they're able to do just that.
He's very cooperative and agrees to go to the station for an interview. He seems very concerned about the blood found at the apartment.
But Errol insists he has no idea how it got there.
Do y'all think that means she's hurt? I'm so worried about her.
We don't know. We've sent the blood off for testing to see if it's a match for Janelle, but it's not looking good.
Detectives tell him that they know he's been physically violent with Janelle in the past. And Errol doesn't deny it. He says, yes, he has, but they always found a way to smooth things out and make up.
It's definitely not something that I'm proud of. I care about her a lot.
Errol says the last time he saw Janelle was on the 15th, when she was packing up her bags at her apartment.
And then later on, he had no idea where Janelle was at and was unable to get in contact with her. He stated that he called her multiple times on the phone and that she never answered the phone.
Errol admits he wasn't happy about Janelle's plan to move in with her new boyfriend, Tim.
He knew about Tim, he knew that Tim was dating Janelle, but he assures detectives that it was nothing serious.
Listen, Janelle and I have never had the perfect relationship, but we always end up working things out.
He said Janelle was still in love with him and that they were planning on getting back together.
Errol claims that he and Janelle had so much chemistry that in fact the two of them had sex multiple times on the 15th.
What time did she leave?
Well, technically, I'm the one who left.
What do you mean?
Errol Moore mentions that he has another girlfriend.
He says he took the baby to his other girlfriend's house.
Errol's new girlfriend's name is Candace Dean.
So the police are like, well, who is Candace Dean?
Errol told police that he and Candace had dated in high school, then she moved away for about a year, but when she returned, they picked up where they left off.
Janelle wasn't too happy about that, and she started sending Candace messages on social media.
Candace and Janelle were sworn mortal enemies.
Oh, girl, get out of here. He's got this now.
College Park detectives investigating the disappearance of 20-year-old Janelle Aaron are speaking with her ex-boyfriend, Errol Moore.
Errol claims that he and Janelle slept together on July 15th, the same day she disappeared.
And according to Errol, that wasn't his only sexual rendezvous that day.
When he left the apartment, he left to meet up with his girlfriend, Candace Dean.
Candace and Janelle were sworn mortal enemies.
Errol tells detectives the tension between Janelle and Candace reached its peak a few months earlier.
Errol claimed Janelle actually confronted him and Candace.
Oh, girl, get out of here. He's got this now. You think so?
Janelle, just leave us alone.
Errol says he's trying to get Janelle to leave, and then that's when he says Janelle took things to a whole nother level.
Janelle actually escalated it and slapped Errol across the face.
Errol claims he tried to keep his cool.
Errol just told her she needed to leave and she needed to calm down.
Errol said she finally left, but she and Candace never smoothed things over.
Do you think Candace could have harmed Janelle?
Nah, no way.
Errol told police that he knew that Candace hated Janelle and Janelle hated Candace, but he didn't think that she would want to hurt her.
However, detectives aren't so sure.
They want to speak with Candace immediately to get her side of the story.
So after wrapping up their interview with Errol, they bring Candace in for questioning.
So here's the deal, Candace. Janelle Aaron has been missing since July 15th, and we know the two of you have not been getting along.
So, I haven't seen her in months, and I plan to keep it that way.
Candace says that Errol was only spending time with Janelle because of the baby, and that Errol really didn't want to be with her, and he was truly in love with Candace.
Is that why he slept with her on the 15th before he met up with you?
What?
This information hits Candace hard. She starts crying. She's very emotional.
I can't believe he played me like that.
Candace, listen. Tell us the truth. Did you do anything to hurt Janelle?
No.
Candace admitted that she and Janelle hated each other, but she didn't have anything to do with her disappearance.
Candace confirms that Errol came over to her place on the evening of July 15th, around 7:30 p.m.
She said he went to spend the night with her and left the next day around noon. She never saw or heard from Janelle during that time.
Detectives are suspicious of Candace's story, but they can't hold her on a hunch.
While detectives aren't 100% sure that they can trust Candace, they have no evidence to hold her on, so they end up releasing her.
Without a body or confirmation of Janelle being dead, the police have their hands tied in a lot of ways.
However, when the lab results from the blood found in Janelle's apartment come back, it confirms everyone's worst fears.
The crime lab confirmed, in fact, that the blood within the apartment belonged to Janelle Aaron. We had positive identification at that point that that blood was hers.
At this point, detectives are worried it may be too late to save Janelle. It's clear she lost a lot of blood.
But who did this to her? When Janelle's best friend, Jasmine Clark, comes forward, detectives will get one step closer to answering that question.
Thank you for coming in today. We understand that you may have some information that will be useful to us.
The last time I talked to Janelle was July 15th. On the phone, Janelle was telling me about Tim, and she sounded really excited about this relationship. I remember asking her, well, what about Errol? And she seemed so done. Like, okay, what about him? She was so over it.
Girl, I'm packing up to leave as we speak.
But Jasmine says Errol soon interrupted their conversation.
They started arguing, like a verbal altercation, and she was like, basically like, I'm gonna call you back. Basically, when he leaves, I'll call you back. And I said, okay.
Bye, girl.
Factually, Errol was the last person to be with Janelle.
The detectives asked me if I believed that Errol was capable of hurting Janelle, and yes, I did believe that.
Detectives need to get Errol Moore to tell them the truth.
After speaking with her best friend Jasmine, detectives investigating the disappearance of Janelle Aaron are more certain than ever that Janelle's ex-boyfriend, Errol Moore, knows what happened to her.
Janelle's best friend Jasmine overheard her arguing over the phone with Errol shortly before she disappeared.
And according to Janelle's friends, he was known to be violent with her.
The detectives asked me if I believed that Errol was capable of hurting Janelle, and yes, I did believe that.
So based on those facts and circumstances, we knew that it was highly likely that he had a direct involvement with Janelle's disappearance, but we had no proof. We had no eyewitnesses.
Detectives know that if they want any chance of finding Janelle alive, they're going to have to get Errol to come out with the truth.
Later that day, they bring him back in for a follow-up interview.
Welcome back, Errol.
They said, you know, Errol, you're not telling us the full story. We've done our own investigation, and we found some things that just simply don't add up.
What were you and Janelle arguing about that afternoon? Why did you fail to mention it the last time we spoke?
At this point, Errol cracks.
So what Errol Moore finally said was, you know what, it's true. What I'd been telling you wasn't the full story. Errol said, I got in an argument with her about Tim Williams.
Now, what does he have that I don't?
He's nice to me for one thing.
And I'm not nice to you?
Janelle fought back. She argued with him that he was with Candace. He was with somebody else too, so why did it matter if she had moved on?
Just leave me alone.
What? Nah.
Errol admits that the argument became more and more heated.
Errol claims Janelle then escalated the fight to a whole new level.
You're making a mistake. We should be a family.
Earl, I've had it with you.
At that point, Janelle, he says, grabbed a knife.
Errol says he grabbed Janelle's hand and that's when she dropped the knife, but he says she kept coming at him and he says that's when he put her in a chokehold.
And then just began choking her, and she began convulsing. After her convulsion, she fell down on the ground, and he said he could not get her up.
Janelle?
Well, what about the blood?
I asked him, did you cut her? Because there was a lot of blood in the house. And he said no, but she was bleeding out the mouth.
Errol said, I panicked and I left with the baby and I left with her things.
Look, I was just so in shock that the situation got so out of hand.
I said, well, where did you go? And he said, well, I went back to my girlfriend's house and I continued my life, basically.
I was confused. I was scared.
He said, I spent the weekend trying to figure out what to do.
And Errol said when a couple days went by, he knew he needed to do something.
As time passed, he was able to gather his thoughts, and then he realized that he had to go back and clean up the crime scene.
At first, he was hoping it was just a horrible nightmare. But when he opened the door, he saw Janelle lying in a pool of her own blood.
Errol didn't really know what to do with the body, but eventually he looked around and he saw a big blue bin that Janelle had used to move her things down to Atlanta. He grabbed the bin and placed her body in the bin.
Then he began cleaning up.
And what'd you do with her body?
Tell us where she is, Errol.
He finally admits that he placed her in a wooded area near Sherwood Cemetery.
Look, you have to believe me, I didn't expect for any of this to happen.
Well, then stand up, Errol.
With Errol's confession, Clayton County Police arrest him, and they assemble a team to go out and recover Janelle's body.
We went out to Sherwood Cemetery and started doing a grid search.
Eventually, they see something in the distance there. It looks like something covered in leaves, and they walk up and discover a blue bin.
What's inside that bin is the likes of which investigators have never seen.
Dear God.
In October of 2010, Errol Moore has finally admitted to killing his ex-girlfriend, Janelle Aaron.
He claimed he killed her in self-defense after she came at him with a knife, but investigators don't really buy his story.
After speaking with Errol, investigators have arrived at the location where he claims to have left Janelle's body inside a plastic bin, but they never could have prepared themselves for what they find.
What's inside that bin is the likes of which investigators have never seen.
Dear God.
The badly decomposed remains of Janelle Aaron.
Her body literally melted in that hot Atlanta heat.
Atlanta had a large amount of rain during the summertime. And unfortunately, with that large amount of rain, the actual plastic tote that her body was placed in filled up with water all the way to the top. There wasn't a lot left of her body.
The state of decomposition means proving cause of death will be difficult.
We could never figure out what actually cause of death was, because there was no physical evidence to say that she was stabbed, choked, because the body was so decomposed.
The news hits Janelle's loved ones like a ton of bricks.
They've informed us that they have found my sister's remains and that Errol led them to her. My first reaction, I screamed. I just screamed.
I remember they told me that she was deceased. And I remember just dropping down to my knees and crying. I remember like being around people and they like, what is wrong with him? Like, it just broke my heart.
I was heartbroken. I was destroyed. I couldn't understand how Errol was the one saying, come home, and this whole time it was you.
We had been suffering and searching and hoping and wanting and processing and dealing for over 3 months at this point. So the relief came in getting that information that we needed so that we could be at peace. There was minor relief in knowing that he was caught and that he wasn't going to be able to just live out here freely.
Errol is officially charged with Janelle's murder.
He was charged with 1 count of malice murder, 1 count of felony murder, 3 counts of concealing a body, and 1 count of tampering with evidence.
And when he goes on trial in April of 2012, prosecutors don't hold back.
One of the main thrusts of this case for the prosecution was the hypocrisy of it all. The hypocrisy of his actions and the hypocrisy of his words. That is, after she went missing in July, he spent the next 2 or 3 months talking about how much he missed her, talking about how much their baby needed her mother, and then to have it discovered that he knew where her remains were the entire time. And for months he knew, and for months he did nothing about it, while callously disregarding the pain and the suffering that her family was going through. And so that was the story we told.
Errol's defense team echoes the same version of events Errol told detectives, that he attacked Janelle in self-defense. But prosecutors aren't buying it.
Our theory of the case from beginning to end always was and still remains that this wasn't an act of self-defense. This was an act of rage.
Now, what does he have that I don't?
Just leave me alone.
What? Nah.
Janelle never came at Errol with a knife. She was simply trying to leave the apartment.
You ain't leaving.
Okay, can you stop?
I ain't letting you break up our family.
It's surmised that when she tried to leave, Errol slammed her to the ground, with the force of impact causing her to bleed out, resulting in the pool of blood found in the apartment.
This was an act of enraged young man responding to a situation that he could no longer control, and that is namely Janelle moving on and seeing a new guy and starting a new life. He has this personality type of narcissism. I'm gonna be the one to control this. I'm gonna be the one to prevail. And so it's that very personality type that led to the murder in the first place.
But after the jury retires to deliberate, they send shockwaves through the courtroom.
Some of the jury believes that Errol was telling the truth.
You have 12 jurors. You have to have an unanimous verdict. It has to be all 12. When they show what happened, they make a decision, guilty or not.
They can't reach a decision, so ultimately, the court is left to declare a mistrial.
I was extremely nervous when the mistrial happened and that he may get away with it. I was very worried. And he had been twisting the story and maneuvering it the entire time. So there's always that in the back of your mind, like they could possibly believe that. And he could possibly get away with it.
Errol Moore used the self-defense issue, which shows you even more that he really had no remorse for Janelle. If he did, he would take responsibility for it and not put the family through that trial again.
To go through a trial is just grueling in itself. To go through that process, especially with someone who you love and you're close with, but then to watch and hear a mistrial and to just feel like that person is getting away, even if it's just momentarily, that feeling of helplessness, that feeling of that person possibly getting away with taking your loved one from you and there's nothing you can do about it. I don't wish that feeling on anyone.
But prosecutors encourage Janelle's loved ones to keep the faith.
He doesn't get released on bond or nothing like that. They just try it again. To have a verdict, you have to have all 12 people make the same decision on it. It can't be a majority.
So in April 2012, the second trial began. And honestly, I will say I didn't want to get my hopes up. I was hoping that this time around, justice would be served and we would get some progress, but didn't have my hopes up high for it.
This time, the district attorney's office presented basically the same evidence as last time, trying to show that this was not an accident. This was premeditated jealousy.
And this time, the jury agrees.
The jury in Clayton County found Errol Moore guilty of voluntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, aggravated assault.
Voluntary manslaughter, meaning that Errol Moore did kill Janelle Aaron, but it was in a heat of passion. It wasn't a malice, intentional murder.
Clayton County judge sentenced Errol Moore to 36 years behind bars, which seems like not enough time in this case.
I was relieved when I heard the verdict to an extent, but unfortunately, my sister's life is over. She'll never get to know her daughter. My family and I will never get to speak to her again. We'll never get to see her again. It'll never be fair. It'll never be completely justified, in my opinion.
Eventually, he will be out. Hopefully, he matured and he forgave himself for his wrongs, and the world will too. But me personally, I never forgive him. A beautiful soul was taken away off jealousy and anger. We lost a great woman, a great mother, a great friend, a soulmate, a sister in this horrible, horrible fatal attraction.
I don't feel or believe that justice was served. This was very unfortunate, a tragedy. It was unnecessary and uncalled for, especially considering that Errol had a whole nother girlfriend. He took a life for nothing.
My niece is currently being taken care of by my aunt, and she is in a loving environment, and we're all working together to grow her and give her everything she needs to become a beautiful, amazing woman just like her mom. Janelle, she was a great mother, and she loved her daughter more than anything in this world. And so I just want her to be remembered for the best of who she was, not how she left.
The summer of 1988 should have been remembered for bicycles left on front lawns, children racing home before the streetlights came on, and the quiet confidence of a neighborhood that believed evil happened somewhere else. Instead, one ordinary Saturday transformed an Indiana community into the setting of a nightmare that would linger for decades. It began with a little girl who never made it home. By the time the truth finally surfaced, nearly 40 years later, the man responsible had spent a lifetime believing he had disappeared into the crowd. He believed the trail had gone cold. He believed time had erased every mistake. He was wrong. A single strand of DNA, preserved through years of unanswered questions and relentless determination, would eventually accomplish what thousands of interviews, endless searches, and countless sleepless nights could not. But before science rewrote the ending, there was only fear, heartbreak, and a mystery that seemed impossible to solve. 8-year-old April, Marie Tinsley, was the kind of child every neighbor recognized. Bright, energetic, and independent enough to enjoy short walks through familiar streets, she represented the innocence that defined countless American suburbs during the late 1980s. On the afternoon of April 1st, SIL, 1988, she left her family's home in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to visit friends nearby. It was a route she knew well. Nothing about the day hinted that history was quietly shifting beneath her feet. Somewhere between one familiar house and another, April vanished. When she failed to return, concern spread quickly through the neighborhood. At first, family members believed there had been a simple misunderstanding. Perhaps she had stayed longer than expected. Perhaps she had stopped to play. Minutes became hours. Concern hardened into panic. Calls were made. Friends were questioned. Streets were searched. By evening, police officers were moving through residential blocks while anxious volunteers gathered with flashlights, desperately hoping to find a frightened child waiting to be rescued. Every passing hour carried a darker possibility. Posters appeared almost immediately. Television stations interrupted programming with urgent bulletins. Local newspapers printed April's smiling school photograph beside headlines asking for help. Hundreds of residents joined organized searches, combing wooded areas, vacant lots, drainage ditches, and quiet roads stretching far beyond the neighborhood where she had last been seen. Helicopters flew overhead. Search dogs followed fading scents. Investigators interviewed anyone who might have noticed an unfamiliar vehicle or suspicious stranger. Every tip mattered because every second mattered. Yet despite the enormous effort, April seemed to have disappeared without leaving behind an explanation. The uncertainty ended 2 days later in the most devastating way imaginable. On April 3rd, a jogger discovered the body of a young girl lying in a ditch along a rural road in neighboring DeKalb County, miles from where she had vanished. Investigators soon confirmed what everyone feared. It was April Tinsley. The child the community had searched for with hope was gone. The discovery transformed a missing person investigation into a homicide investigation that immediately captured national attention. Detectives sealed off the area. Crime scene technicians photographed every detail, collecting fibers, biological evidence, tire impressions, and anything else that might identify the killer. They knew they had only one opportunity to preserve the truth hidden within the scene. The examination revealed that April had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. The brutality shocked even experienced investigators. There was no sign that the crime had been random violence committed in sudden panic. Instead, the evidence suggested deliberate actions by someone who had planned enough to leave remarkably little behind. Detectives began reconstructing April's final movements hour by hour. They mapped every possible route she could have taken. They interviewed classmates, relatives, neighbors, delivery drivers, construction workers, and strangers who happened to be nearby that afternoon. Thousands of names flowed into investigative files. Each lead promised answers before collapsing into disappointment. Every eliminated suspect deepened the mystery. Every false alarm exhausted resources while allowing the real offender to remain invisible. Then the investigation took an even more disturbing turn. Nearly a year after April's murder, strange messages began appearing in the community. Anonymous notes were found attached to bicycles belonging to young girls. The letters contained horrifying statements suggesting intimate knowledge of April's murder. They taunted police. They threatened more violence. They hinted that the author enjoyed terrifying an entire town. Parents who had already been living in fear suddenly refused to let children play outside alone. Bicycle rides ended. Walks to school disappeared. Windows were checked repeatedly before bedtime. Every unfamiliar man driving slowly through residential streets became a potential suspect. Detectives carefully examined each note, hoping fingerprints or handwriting analysis would expose the author. Linguistic experts reviewed wording and spelling. Behavioral analysts attempted to construct a psychological profile. The letters projected arrogance, manipulation, and confidence. Whoever wrote them appeared convinced he was untouchable. The possibility that the killer remained nearby transformed daily life throughout Northeast Indiana. Schools increased safety precautions. Community meetings overflowed with frightened families demanding answers. Police departments assigned enormous manpower despite mounting frustration. Detectives pursued hundreds of additional interviews. Registered offenders were scrutinized. Former residents were tracked down. Men with histories of sexual violence underwent questioning. Search warrants multiplied. Laboratory examinations consumed months. Yet every promising direction eventually reached another dead end. Behind closed doors, investigators refused to surrender. Advances in forensic science during the late 1980s offered hope, but technology remained limited compared to what would exist decades later. Biological evidence recovered during the investigation contained information that scientists knew could someday become valuable. Rather than allowing those samples to disappear into forgotten storage rooms, careful evidence preservation ensured they remained available for future testing. That decision, almost invisible at the time, would ultimately become one of the most important choices made during the entire investigation. Years passed. Children who had once hidden indoors because of fear became adults with families of their own. Detectives retired. New investigators inherited towering stacks of reports compiled by predecessors who had spent careers chasing answers that always seemed just beyond reach. Every few years, another promising lead emerged. Someone claimed to recognize the handwriting. Someone remembered a suspicious neighbor. Someone reported a disturbing confession overheard long ago. Investigators reopened interviews, compared timelines, collected elimination samples, and once again watched hope dissolve into silence. The murder of April Tinsley became what investigators call a cold case, but the phrase never reflected reality. Cold suggests abandonment. This investigation never truly stopped. It simply evolved. Evidence waited while science caught up. The unanswered questions remained alive inside every detective who opened the case file. They remained alive inside April's family, whose grief never accepted the passage of time as a substitute for justice. They remained alive inside the community that refused to forget the little girl whose photograph had once filled newspaper front pages. Across America, forensic science entered a revolution. DNA profiling became increasingly sophisticated. Laboratories extracted genetic material from samples previously considered too small or too degraded to analyze. Databases expanded. Investigators solved crimes once believed impossible to crack. Each breakthrough encouraged detectives working older cases to revisit forgotten evidence. If biological material still existed, perhaps modern science could reveal what earlier generations of investigators simply lacked the tools to see. The evidence collected in April's case became part of that new wave of hope. Scientists successfully developed a DNA profile believed to belong to the killer. Yet another obstacle emerged. The profile matched no one in existing criminal databases. The man responsible had either never submitted DNA through prior qualifying convictions or had somehow remained outside the systems investigators depended upon. Once again, the investigation stood at the edge of success without crossing the finish line. But unlike earlier decades, entirely new methods were beginning to reshape criminal investigations. Researchers and detectives started exploring investigative genetic genealogy, a technique capable of identifying unknown suspects through distant family relationships rather than direct database matches. The approach remained relatively new, demanding patience, precision, and extensive genealogical research. It would require building family trees branch by branch, generation by generation, searching for one individual whose life aligned with the evidence. Somewhere, hidden inside ordinary family history, the killer had unknowingly left another trail. For nearly 40 years, he had believed the silence protected him. He had continued living among unsuspecting neighbors, carrying the confidence of someone who imagined the past had disappeared forever. He could not know that every passing year strengthened the very science that would eventually dismantle his illusion. The evidence never forgot him. It simply waited. Every major investigation begins with a deceptively simple question. What happened between the last ordinary moment and the first sign that something was terribly wrong? For the detectives assigned to the murder of April Tinsley, that question became an obsession. Long before forensic breakthroughs and DNA technology transformed the case decades later, investigators understood that the answer might be hidden in a matter of minutes. Somewhere along a familiar route through a quiet Indiana neighborhood, an 8-year-old girl had vanished without anyone immediately realizing a crime was unfolding. Their first task was not to identify a suspect. It was to reconstruct an afternoon that had seemed completely ordinary until it suddenly became unforgettable. Detectives returned to the neighborhood repeatedly, walking the same sidewalks April had been expected to use. They studied the streets at different times of day, observing traffic patterns, visibility from nearby homes, and the countless places where someone could briefly disappear from another person's view. A route that appeared straightforward on a map looked very different when experienced on foot. A parked vehicle could block a line of sight. A stand of trees could conceal movement for a few crucial seconds. A quiet intersection that felt safe to local children also offered opportunities for someone intent on avoiding attention. Witness interviews became the foundation of the reconstruction. Officers spoke with family members, neighbors, friends, and anyone believed to have been in the area that afternoon. Each conversation added another piece to an incomplete timeline. Some people remembered seeing children playing outside. Others recalled passing vehicles or hearing dogs bark. Most observations seemed insignificant in isolation, yet investigators carefully documented them all, knowing that the smallest detail could later prove decisive. They distinguished confirmed sightings from uncertain memories, recognizing how quickly recollections can change after a shocking event receives widespread publicity. Inside the investigative headquarters, maps gradually filled with handwritten notes, colored markers, and carefully plotted locations. Detectives estimated walking times between key points, comparing them with witness accounts to narrow the window during which April disappeared. They searched for inconsistencies rather than dramatic revelations. If one timeline placed her at a particular location while another suggested something different, they returned to the witnesses, asking the same questions in different ways, attempting to separate certainty from assumption. Reconstructing events required patience more than instinct. At the same time, search efforts expanded beyond the immediate neighborhood. Officers and volunteers examined nearby fields, wooded areas, drainage ditches, and roads leading away from the community. Search teams worked methodically, covering ground that had seemed unremarkable only hours earlier. Every location had to be considered because investigators could not yet determine whether April had remained close to home or had been taken elsewhere. The uncertainty forced them to pursue multiple possibilities simultaneously, stretching resources while time remained critically important. Detectives also examined whether a vehicle might have played a role. Residents were asked to remember unfamiliar cars, delivery trucks, or anyone behaving unusually in the area. As often happens in major investigations, reports quickly multiplied. Some witnesses described vehicles that could never be identified. Others remembered details that ultimately conflicted with established facts. Each lead required careful follow-up before it could be eliminated. The process was painstaking, but dismissing information too quickly risked overlooking something genuinely important. As the investigation progressed, the reconstructed timeline became increasingly refined, yet one troubling reality remained unchanged. There was a brief period during which April's movements could not be fully accounted for. Those missing minutes became the focus of endless discussion among investigators. They revisited them repeatedly, convinced that understanding exactly where she had been and who might have encountered her was essential to identifying the person responsible. Although the case would remain unsolved for many years, the early investigative work established a framework that endured. The careful documentation of witness statements, the preservation of physical evidence, and the disciplined reconstruction of April's final known movements ensured that future investigators would inherit more than unanswered questions. They inherited a detailed record built by detectives who understood that even when immediate answers prove elusive, meticulous police work can preserve the truth long enough for future advances in forensic science to uncover what time alone could not erase. On the morning the search ended, the atmosphere changed with almost unbearable speed. What had begun as an urgent effort to locate a missing child became the solemn work of documenting a homicide. The discovery of April Tinsley's body on a rural roadside immediately transformed the investigation, drawing detectives, crime scene technicians, forensic specialists, and prosecutors into a coordinated effort to preserve every possible piece of evidence before weather, time, or human activity could erase it. Long before anyone knew the name of the person responsible, investigators understood that the crime scene itself might become the most reliable witness. The first officers arriving at the location established a secure perimeter extending well beyond the immediate area where the body was found. Experience had taught investigators that important evidence is often located far from the most obvious focal point. Tire tracks, discarded objects, footwear impressions, broken vegetation, and trace materials could all reveal how the offender arrived, moved through the area, and departed. Rather than concentrating only on the immediate surroundings, search teams expanded outward in carefully organized sections, ensuring that no portion of the scene was overlooked. Crime scene photographers documented the location before anything was disturbed. Every angle was recorded systematically, beginning with wide images that established the setting before moving progressively closer to capture individual details. Measurements were taken, reference markers were placed, and sketches supplemented the photographic record. The objective was to preserve an exact representation of the scene so investigators, forensic scientists, attorneys, and ultimately jurors could later understand its original condition without relying solely on memory. Forensic personnel then began the meticulous task of collecting physical evidence. Each item, regardless of how insignificant it appeared, was handled according to established procedures designed to prevent contamination. Clothing, biological material, soil samples, plant debris, fibers, and other trace evidence were packaged separately, labeled, and entered into a documented chain of custody. Maintaining that chain was essential. Every transfer of evidence had to be recorded to ensure its integrity throughout what investigators already suspected could become a lengthy criminal investigation. Medical examiners conducted an initial assessment at the scene before the body was transported for a comprehensive autopsy. The purpose of the examination was not merely to determine the cause and manner of death, but also to identify injuries, recover trace evidence, and estimate the sequence of events as accurately as possible. Scientific findings from the postmortem examination would later become a critical component of the investigative timeline, helping detectives compare witness statements with physical evidence. While forensic specialists processed the immediate location, detectives worked to answer another crucial question. Was the rural roadside the site of the homicide, or had the victim been transported there after the crime occurred? Investigators carefully evaluated the surrounding area for indications that events had unfolded at that location or whether it had been selected primarily as a disposal site. Such determinations often influence investigative strategy, directing attention toward entirely different geographic areas where the original assault may have taken place. Laboratories examined the collected evidence using the forensic techniques available in the late 1980s. Analysts compared hairs, fibers, fingerprints, and biological samples, searching for associations that might identify or exclude potential suspects. Although DNA profiling was still in its early stages and far less advanced than it would later become, investigators recognized the importance of preserving biological evidence under conditions that would allow future testing as technology improved. Decisions made during those early days, particularly regarding evidence preservation, would ultimately prove invaluable decades later. The crime scene also prompted investigators to consider offender behavior. The location where the body was recovered, the apparent efforts to conceal or expose evidence, and the manner in which the victim had been left all became subjects of careful analysis. Behavioral observations alone could not identify a suspect, but they assisted detectives in developing investigative priorities and evaluating future leads. Every conclusion, however, remained tentative until supported by verifiable evidence. As news of the homicide spread, public attention intensified dramatically. The discovery generated hundreds of telephone calls from concerned citizens offering information, theories, and possible sightings. Detectives established procedures to document and evaluate every tip, understanding that valuable information frequently arrives alongside inaccurate or speculative reports. Managing this growing volume of information became an investigation in itself, requiring careful organization so that credible leads would not be lost among less reliable accounts. Within the investigative headquarters, evidence from the crime scene became the foundation upon which the entire case would rest. Maps, photographs, laboratory reports, witness interviews, and forensic findings were assembled into an increasingly complex case file. Detectives recognized that immediate answers might not emerge, but thorough documentation would ensure that future investigators could revisit every decision, every observation, and every preserved item with the benefit of new scientific techniques. History would ultimately demonstrate the wisdom of that approach. Although the homicide remained unsolved for many years, the professionalism displayed during the initial processing of the crime scene preserved critical evidence that survived long after memories faded and investigative personnel changed. Advances in forensic DNA analysis and investigative genetic genealogy, unavailable at the time of the original investigation, would eventually allow scientists to extract new information from evidence collected decades earlier. The careful work performed at the scene did not solve the case immediately, but it ensured that the truth remained preserved within the evidence itself, waiting for science to develop the tools capable of revealing it. In the months following April Tinsley's murder, investigators pursued the case with extraordinary intensity. Detectives worked extended hours, new leads arrived daily, and every report of suspicious activity demanded immediate attention. Hundreds of interviews were conducted, evidence was repeatedly examined, and tips flowed into the investigative headquarters from across Indiana and beyond. The urgency that defined the first days of the investigation reflected a widespread belief that the person responsible could still be identified through conventional police work. Yet, as weeks turned into months, the pattern familiar to many major investigations began to emerge. Promising leads became dead ends, witness memories grew less certain, and the volume of new information steadily declined. The investigation did not become a cold case because detectives stopped searching. Rather, it entered that category after every available investigative avenue had been explored without producing sufficient evidence to identify and prosecute a suspect. Detectives continued reviewing witness statements, comparing timelines, and re-examining physical evidence, but each effort yielded fewer new opportunities. Individuals who initially appeared suspicious were eliminated through corroborated alibis, forensic comparisons, or additional investigation. Rumors circulated throughout the community, yet speculation alone could not satisfy the legal standards required to bring criminal charges. One of the greatest challenges confronting investigators was the gradual erosion of memory. Witnesses who had confidently described events shortly after the crime found it increasingly difficult to recall precise details months or years later. Ordinary observations became intertwined with newspaper reports, television coverage, and conversations with neighbors. Detectives recognized this natural process and approached subsequent interviews with caution, carefully distinguishing between first-hand recollections and information absorbed after the fact. Preserving the accuracy of earlier statements became just as important as collecting new ones. Physical evidence remained the investigation's strongest asset, but forensic science during the late 1980s had significant limitations compared with technologies that would emerge decades later. Laboratory specialists analyzed available biological material, trace evidence, and other forensic findings using the best methods then available. While these examinations provided valuable investigative information, they could not always identify an unknown offender. Detectives nevertheless understood the importance of preserving every item carefully, anticipating that future scientific advances might reveal information unavailable at the time. As investigative activity became less visible to the public, some members of the community mistakenly concluded that the case had been abandoned. In reality, the file remained active. Detectives periodically reviewed evidence, revisited witness statements, and reassessed investigative strategies whenever new information emerged. Cold case status did not signify closure. Instead, it reflected an investigation awaiting either additional evidence or technological developments capable of generating new leads. Personnel changes presented another challenge. Officers and detectives who had participated in the original investigation retired or transferred to other assignments. Successive investigators inherited extensive case files compiled over years of painstaking work. Preserving continuity required meticulous documentation. Reports, photographs, evidence inventories, interview transcripts, and forensic records ensured that institutional knowledge survived even as individual investigators changed. Comprehensive record-keeping became essential because each new detective needed to understand not only what had been discovered, but also why certain investigative decisions had been made. The emotional impact extended far beyond law enforcement. April Tinsley's family continued living with unanswered questions that no passage of time could erase. Community members who had participated in the original search remembered the case as a defining event in local history. Parents who had altered family routines in response to the crime carried those memories into later years, while children who had grown up during the investigation became adults still aware that the person responsible had never been identified. The unresolved nature of the case contributed to its enduring presence in the public consciousness. Throughout the following decades, investigators remained attentive to advances in forensic science. As DNA analysis evolved from an emerging technique into a powerful investigative tool, evidence preserved during the original investigation acquired renewed significance. Biological samples that had once exceeded the capabilities of available technology became candidates for increasingly sophisticated laboratory examination. Each scientific advancement prompted another review of the case, reflecting the understanding that evidence itself does not lose value simply because time has passed. The investigation also benefited from the broader development of specialized cold case units within many law enforcement agencies. These units recognize that older investigations often possess advantages unavailable during their initial stages. Modern forensic methods, digital record systems, expanded criminal databases, and improved analytical techniques allow investigators to revisit long-standing cases with capabilities unimaginable when the crimes originally occurred. The preservation of evidence, therefore, became an investment in future justice rather than merely a record of past investigative efforts. Ultimately, the transition of April Tinsley's homicide into a cold case illustrated both the limitations and the resilience of criminal investigation. Conventional methods had carried detectives as far as the available evidence allowed, but they had not exhausted the case's potential. The careful preservation of physical evidence, comprehensive documentation, and continued institutional commitment ensured that the investigation remained capable of benefiting from future scientific breakthroughs. Rather than marking the end of the search for answers, the cold case designation represented a period of waiting, one in which the evidence remained intact. The questions remained unresolved, and investigators continued to believe that advances in forensic science might someday provide the opportunity that earlier generations had lacked. The most significant decisions in a criminal investigation are not always the dramatic ones. They are often the quiet choices made in laboratories, evidence rooms, and examination facilities, places far removed from television cameras and public attention. In the investigation into the murder of April Tinsley, one such decision would ultimately shape the future of the case. Although investigators in 1988 could not predict the extraordinary advances forensic science would achieve over the following decades, they understood a fundamental principle that continues to guide modern criminal investigations. Evidence, once lost or contaminated, cannot be recreated. Their commitment to preserving biological evidence with care ensured that, even as years passed without an arrest, the possibility of future scientific analysis remained alive. From the earliest stages of the investigation, crime scene personnel and forensic specialists followed established protocols for collecting biological material that might later prove significant. Every item believed capable of containing biological evidence was handled with deliberate caution. Separate packaging, careful labeling, detailed documentation, and secure transportation formed part of a process designed to minimize contamination and preserve the original condition of each exhibit. Even at a time when forensic DNA analysis was still developing, investigators recognized that biological evidence could become increasingly valuable as laboratory methods evolved. Once collected, evidence entered a documented chain of custody. This record identified each individual responsible for handling the material, the dates and times of transfers, and the conditions under which it was stored. Maintaining an unbroken chain of custody served two essential purposes. It protected the integrity of the evidence from accidental alteration or loss, and it ensured that any future criminal prosecution could demonstrate that the material presented in court was the same evidence originally recovered during the investigation. Proper storage was equally important. Biological evidence is susceptible to environmental factors such as heat, moisture, and contamination, all of which can reduce its scientific value. Evidence custodians therefore maintain storage conditions intended to preserve samples for long periods whenever practical. Although preservation standards and laboratory practices have continued to improve over time, the careful handling of evidence during the original investigation significantly increased the likelihood that future testing would remain possible. Throughout the following years, forensic science advanced at a remarkable pace. Techniques that had once required relatively large, high-quality samples gradually became capable of analyzing much smaller or older biological material. Laboratories developed increasingly sensitive methods for examining DNA, enabling scientists to generate profiles from evidence that earlier generations of investigators could not fully utilize. These developments transformed countless criminal investigations, particularly those involving unsolved homicides in which biological evidence had been preserved with care. As scientific capabilities expanded, investigators revisited evidence collected in April Tinsley's case. Rather than assuming that previous laboratory results represented the final word, they recognized that modern testing might reveal information unavailable when the evidence had first been examined. This willingness to reassess preserved material reflected an important principle of cold case investigation. While facts established through reliable evidence remain constant, the tools available to interpret those facts continue to improve. The preservation of biological evidence also highlighted the importance of comprehensive documentation. Laboratory notes, evidence inventories, collection records, and analytical reports allowed later investigators to understand precisely how each item had been obtained, examined, and stored. Such documentation reduced uncertainty and enabled modern forensic specialists to evaluate preserved evidence with confidence. Without accurate records, even well-preserved material may lose much of its investigative value. Advances in DNA technology eventually allowed scientists to develop increasingly informative genetic profiles from preserved biological evidence associated with the investigation. Although those developments occurred many years after the original crime, they depended entirely upon the professionalism demonstrated during the earliest stages of evidence collection and preservation. Had investigators failed to recognize the potential future significance of biological material, later scientific breakthroughs might have been unable to contribute meaningfully to the case. The history of the April Tinsley investigation illustrates a broader lesson within forensic science. Criminal investigations frequently extend beyond the capabilities of contemporary technology. Evidence collected today may answer questions that cannot yet be resolved but could become understandable through future scientific progress. Consequently, careful preservation is not merely an administrative responsibility. It is an investment in future investigative opportunity. In this case, the biological evidence remained silent for many years. It did not immediately identify the offender, nor did it produce an arrest during the initial investigation. Yet silence did not signify failure. Preserved evidence continued to exist unchanged while forensic science advanced around it. Decades later, technological innovations would permit investigators to examine that same material in ways unimaginable in 1988, demonstrating that meticulous evidence preservation can bridge generations of investigative effort. Ultimately, the careful handling of biological evidence represented one of the investigation's greatest strengths. Long after witness memories faded and conventional leads were exhausted, the preserved forensic material retained the potential to provide objective scientific information. Its survival reflected disciplined police work, adherence to forensic standards, and an understanding that justice sometimes depends not only on immediate investigative success, but also on the patience to preserve evidence until science becomes capable of revealing the answers it has contained all along. For much of the 20th century, homicide investigations depended heavily on eyewitness testimony, confessions, physical trace evidence, and the instincts of experienced detectives. While these traditional methods solved countless crimes, they also had clear limitations. Witnesses could misremember events, suspects could conceal their identities, and many crime scenes yielded little evidence capable of definitively identifying an unknown offender. When investigations exhausted every available lead without producing an arrest, they frequently became what law enforcement agencies describe as cold cases, active investigations that remain unsolved despite extensive efforts. The development of modern DNA profiling fundamentally transformed this landscape. Rather than relying solely on circumstantial evidence or eyewitness accounts, investigators gained access to a scientific method capable of linking biological evidence recovered from a crime scene to a specific individual with an exceptionally high degree of confidence. This advancement has reshaped criminal investigations worldwide, particularly in cases where biological evidence was carefully preserved long before the necessary technology existed. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is the genetic material found in nearly every cell of the human body. Each individual possesses a unique DNA profile, with the exception of identical twins. Biological materials such as blood, semen, saliva, skin cells, hair-containing root tissue, and certain other bodily tissues may contain sufficient genetic material for forensic examination. In criminal investigations, forensic laboratories analyze selected regions of DNA that vary significantly between unrelated individuals while remaining consistent throughout a person's lifetime. This allows scientists to compare biological material recovered from a crime scene with reference samples collected from known individuals. Unlike earlier forensic techniques that often required relatively large quantities of biological material, modern DNA analysis has become increasingly sensitive. Laboratories can now frequently generate useful DNA profiles from extremely small or degraded samples that would have been unsuitable for testing decades earlier. Improvements in extraction methods, amplification techniques, contamination prevention, and analytical software have significantly expanded the range of evidence that can contribute to criminal investigations. The introduction of polymerase chain reaction, PCR, technology represented one of the most significant advances in forensic genetics. PCR enables laboratories to amplify minute quantities of DNA, producing sufficient genetic material for analysis, even when only trace amounts remain. This capability proved particularly valuable in cold cases, where biological evidence had often deteriorated during years or decades of storage, but still retained recoverable DNA. As forensic DNA profiling matured, many countries established national DNA databases containing profiles obtained from convicted offenders, arrestees in certain jurisdictions, and unidentified crime scene evidence. These databases allow investigators to compare DNA profiles recovered from unsolved crimes against millions of known samples. A direct match may identify a suspect, connect multiple crimes committed by the same individual, or exclude persons previously considered under investigation. Despite these advances, many cold cases initially remained unsolved because the unknown offender's DNA profile did not exist within any law enforcement database. Investigators possessed the offender's genetic information, but had no corresponding individual against whom to compare it. For many years, such cases appeared to have reached another investigative dead end, despite possessing scientifically reliable forensic evidence. A further breakthrough emerged through investigative genetic genealogy, an approach that combines forensic DNA analysis with genealogical research. Instead of searching exclusively for exact matches within criminal justice databases, investigators working within applicable legal and ethical frameworks may compare crime scene DNA to profiles voluntarily uploaded to certain genealogy databases by members of the public who have consented to law enforcement matching where permitted. These comparisons rarely identify the suspect directly. Instead, they often reveal distant biological relatives, such as third or fourth cousins. Professional genealogists then construct extensive family trees using public records, historical documents, census information, birth and marriage records, obituaries, and other genealogical sources to identify individuals who fit both the genetic relationships and the known circumstances of the investigation. This investigative approach has contributed to solving numerous long unsolved homicides and sexual assault cases. One of the most widely known examples is the identification of the offender responsible for the series of crimes attributed to the Golden State Killer. In that investigation, preserved biological evidence was analyzed using modern forensic techniques, and genealogical research ultimately led investigators to a suspect decades after the original offenses had occurred. Similar methods have since assisted law enforcement agencies in resolving many other cold cases across North America and elsewhere. The success of modern DNA profiling depends not only upon scientific innovation, but also upon the quality of the original investigation. Crime scene personnel who carefully collected, documented, and preserved biological evidence years earlier often made future breakthroughs possible without realizing it. Proper packaging, contamination prevention, secure storage, and meticulous chain of custody documentation ensured that biological material remained suitable for later examination using technologies unavailable at the time of collection. In many investigations, evidence that appeared to have limited value during the original inquiry became decisive after advances in forensic science. Cold case investigations today frequently involve multidisciplinary teams that include detectives, forensic scientists, crime analysts, prosecutors, genealogists, and digital researchers. These teams systematically review historical case files, reassess witness statements, examine preserved evidence using current laboratory methods, and evaluate investigative decisions in light of contemporary scientific knowledge. Rather than replacing traditional detective work, DNA profiling complements it by providing objective scientific evidence that can direct investigators toward individuals requiring further inquiry. Modern DNA profiling has also demonstrated the importance of evidence preservation policies. Many law enforcement agencies now retain biological evidence for extended periods, recognizing that future technological developments may allow additional testing beyond current capabilities. As analytical methods continue to improve, Previously inconclusive samples may yield informative DNA profiles, and degraded evidence once considered unsuitable may become scientifically valuable. Although DNA evidence has revolutionized criminal investigations, it is not infallible and does not automatically resolve every case. Biological evidence must be interpreted within the broader context of the investigation. Laboratories follow rigorous quality assurance procedures to minimize contamination, analytical errors, and misinterpretation. Investigators must also establish how and when biological material was deposited, rather than assuming that the mere presence of DNA proves criminal responsibility. Consequently, DNA evidence is generally considered alongside witness testimony, physical evidence, investigative findings, and other relevant information. The emergence of modern DNA profiling represents one of the most significant developments in forensic science since the advent of fingerprint identification. By allowing investigators to revisit unsolved cases with increasingly sophisticated scientific tools, it has transformed the concept of the cold case itself. Investigations that once appeared permanently stalled can now be re-examined through the lens of technologies unimaginable when the crimes originally occurred. For victims' families, communities, and investigators alike, these advances have reinforced an enduring principle of criminal justice. While time may complicate an investigation, carefully preserved evidence can retain the capacity to reveal the truth decades after the crime was committed. For decades, many homicide investigations reached a frustrating point where traditional detective work had accomplished nearly everything possible. Witnesses had been interviewed repeatedly, physical evidence had been collected and analyzed, suspects had been investigated and eliminated, and conventional DNA comparisons had failed to identify the offender. In numerous cases, investigators possessed a complete forensic DNA profile recovered from the crime scene, yet no corresponding profile existed in criminal databases. The evidence clearly belonged to someone, but that individual remained unknown. The emergence of investigative genetic genealogy, (EGE), introduced a new investigative approach capable of generating leads in some of these otherwise stalled cases. Investigative genetic genealogy combines forensic DNA analysis with traditional genealogical research. Unlike conventional forensic DNA searches, which compare an unknown DNA profile directly against profiles contained within law enforcement databases, EGE seeks potential biological relatives of the unknown individual through genealogy databases that permit law enforcement matching under specific legal and privacy conditions. Rather than producing an immediate identification, these searches often reveal distant relatives who may share only a small percentage of DNA with the unknown person. Although such relatives are not suspects simply because of the genetic connection, they provide genealogists with a starting point for reconstructing extended family relationships. The process begins in a forensic laboratory. Scientists first develop a high-quality DNA profile from biological evidence recovered during the original criminal investigation. This evidence may consist of blood, semen, saliva, or other biological material collected according to established forensic procedures. Because genealogical analysis requires substantially more genetic information than conventional forensic comparisons, laboratories often perform additional testing to generate a profile suitable for genealogical research. Once an appropriate profile has been produced, investigators working within applicable laws, agency policies, and the terms governing participating genealogy services may compare the unknown DNA against databases containing profiles voluntarily submitted by individuals interested in learning about their ancestry or connecting with relatives. In many cases, the closest available matches are not immediate family members but distant cousins, sharing only a modest portion of their genetic material with the unknown individual. Even these distant relationships, however, can provide valuable investigative leads. Professional genealogists then undertake the painstaking work of building family trees. They examine publicly available records, including birth certificates, marriage records, census data, military records, newspaper archives, obituaries, cemetery records, property records, and historical family documents. Beginning with identified genetic relatives, they reconstruct multiple generations of family relationships, gradually identifying branches that could logically include the unknown individual. This research often requires hundreds of hours of meticulous documentation and cross-referencing. As family trees expand, investigators begin narrowing potential candidates using information unrelated to genetics. Factors such as age, biological sex, geographic location, historical residence, employment history, and other independently verified investigative facts help determine which individuals warrant additional attention. Importantly, a place within a family tree does not establish criminal responsibility. Instead, genealogical analysis generates investigative leads that must be evaluated using traditional police methods. When investigators identify an individual who appears consistent with both the genealogical research and the known facts of the case, they typically seek additional corroborating evidence before proceeding further. In many jurisdictions, this includes obtaining a reference DNA sample through lawful investigative means. Such samples may come from items that an individual has discarded, where collection is legally permissible, or through court-authorized procedures, depending on the applicable legal framework. Laboratory scientists then compare this reference sample directly with the original forensic DNA profile recovered from the crime scene. Only after this independent forensic comparison confirms a match does DNA evidence become capable of linking the individual to the biological material collected during the investigation. Even then, investigators continue gathering additional evidence, conducting interviews, reviewing historical records, and consulting prosecutors before determining whether criminal charges are appropriate. Investigative genetic genealogy therefore serves as an investigative tool that generates leads rather than as a substitute for comprehensive criminal investigation. The growing use of IG has prompted important legal and ethical discussions. Privacy advocates, forensic scientists, lawmakers, and law enforcement agencies continue to examine questions concerning informed consent, database participation, transparency, judicial oversight, and the appropriate scope of genealogical investigations. Policies governing the use of genealogical databases vary by jurisdiction and by service provider, with many databases allowing users to decide whether their information may be available for qualifying law enforcement investigations. As the field evolves, agencies increasingly operate under formal guidelines intended to balance investigative effectiveness with respect for individual privacy and civil liberties. Despite these considerations, investigative genetic genealogy has contributed to resolving numerous serious violent crimes that had remained unsolved for decades. Families who had lived with uncertainty for many years have, in some cases, received long-awaited answers. Investigators have been able to revisit preserved biological evidence using scientific methods unavailable when the crimes originally occurred, demonstrating the enduring importance of evidence preservation and careful forensic documentation. The success of IG also underscores the continuing partnership between science and traditional detective work. Genealogical research alone cannot solve a homicide, nor can DNA analysis by itself explain the circumstances surrounding a crime. Instead, successful investigations depend upon the integration of forensic science, historical research, witness interviews, legal procedure, and careful investigative judgment. Each discipline contributes information that must be evaluated collectively rather than in isolation. As forensic technology continues to advance, investigative genetic genealogy represents one of the most significant developments in modern criminal investigation. It has expanded the range of cases that may be revisited, provided investigators with new methods for generating leads, and demonstrated that carefully preserved evidence can retain investigative value for decades. While not every cold case contains suitable biological evidence or circumstances appropriate for genealogical analysis, the technique has fundamentally changed expectations regarding long unsolved violent crimes. Investigations once considered permanently stalled may now benefit from scientific and genealogical methods capable of uncovering connections that earlier generations of investigators could not have imagined. When a decades-old homicide investigation is reopened because of new forensic evidence, the public often imagines that a single DNA match immediately solves the case. In reality, identifying a suspect through modern forensic science is usually the beginning of a new investigative phase rather than the end of one. Detectives and prosecutors must determine whether the available evidence can satisfy the legal standard required for a criminal prosecution. Even in cases involving highly reliable DNA evidence, investigators generally seek independent corroboration before presenting the case in court. The first priority after obtaining a significant forensic lead is to verify the scientific findings. Accredited forensic laboratories follow rigorous quality assurance procedures designed to ensure that DNA profiles are accurate and reproducible. Analysts review laboratory records, examine chain of custody documentation, and confirm that testing procedures complied with established scientific standards. Independent technical reviews are commonly performed before results are released to investigators. This process reflects the principle that forensic evidence must be scientifically reliable before it can serve as the foundation of a criminal case. Once the laboratory confirms the DNA findings, detectives revisit the entire investigative file with fresh perspective. Cold case files often contain thousands of pages accumulated over many years, including witness interviews, crime scene photographs, forensic reports, search warrants, investigative notes, and correspondence generated by multiple investigators across different periods. Rather than assuming earlier conclusions remain complete, detectives systematically compare historical information with the newly identified suspect. The objective is not to reinterpret evidence to fit a theory, but to determine whether independently gathered facts consistently support or contradict the developing investigation. Witness evidence receives particular attention during this review. Investigators identify individuals whose observations remain relevant and assess whether additional interviews may clarify earlier statements. Memories naturally change over time, so detectives compare contemporary interviews with original documented accounts to distinguish recollections from information acquired through media coverage or subsequent discussion. Careful documentation allows investigators to evaluate consistency while recognizing the well-established limitations of long-term memory. Physical evidence collected during the original investigation may also undergo renewed examination. Advances in forensic science frequently permit additional analyses that were unavailable when the crime occurred. Fingerprints may be reprocessed using modern imaging techniques. Trace materials can sometimes be examined with improved analytical instruments. Digital enhancement of photographs or maps may reveal details overlooked decades earlier. Each re-examination seeks objective information capable of strengthening or, if necessary, challenging the emerging investigative conclusions. Investigators also reconstruct the suspect's historical circumstances as accurately as possible. Public records, employment history, residential information, vehicle registrations, military records where applicable, and other documented sources help establish whether the individual could reasonably have been connected to the crime. This reconstruction is not intended to prove guilt through association. Rather, it provides factual context against which forensic evidence may be evaluated. Prosecutors generally prefer cases in which multiple independent forms of evidence point toward the same conclusion. The role of prosecutors becomes increasingly important as the investigation progresses. Prosecutors review the available evidence to determine whether it satisfies the legal requirements for filing criminal charges. They evaluate the admissibility of forensic findings, identify potential evidentiary challenges, and advise investigators regarding additional inquiries that may strengthen the case. Because homicide prosecutions often involve extensive pretrial litigation, early collaboration between investigators and prosecutors helps ensure that evidence has been collected, preserved, and documented according to applicable legal standards. Cold case prosecutions also require investigators to anticipate issues unique to the passage of time. Some witnesses may no longer be available because they have died or cannot be located. Physical locations may have changed substantially since the original crime. Documentary records may have been archived under outdated systems or transferred among multiple agencies. Detectives, therefore, devote considerable effort to authenticating historical evidence and establishing continuity between the original investigation and the reopened case. Comprehensive documentation prepared decades earlier often becomes invaluable during this process. Defense attorneys likewise examine every aspect of a cold case investigation. They may challenge laboratory procedures, question witness reliability, scrutinize evidence preservation, or argue that the passage of time has impaired the fairness of the proceedings. These challenges underscore why investigators seek corroborating evidence whenever possible. A case supported by multiple independent sources of reliable information is generally more resilient than one relying upon a single category of evidence alone. The preservation of evidence throughout the investigation remains essential. Chain of custody records demonstrate who handled each item of evidence and under what circumstances. Secure storage protects biological material, documents, and physical exhibits from loss, contamination, or alteration. Cortez frequently examined these procedures closely because confidence in forensic conclusions depends not only upon scientific testing, but also upon confidence that the tested material remained authentic from the moment of collection through laboratory analysis and eventual presentation in court. Modern cold case investigations increasingly rely upon multidisciplinary collaboration. Detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, crime analysts, digital specialists, genealogists in appropriate cases, and victim advocates each contribute expertise that strengthens the overall investigation. No single discipline solves a complex homicide independently. Instead, successful prosecutions emerge through the careful integration of scientific evidence, historical research, investigative experience, and legal analysis. Perhaps the most significant lesson demonstrated by successful cold case prosecutions is that time does not necessarily diminish the value of objective evidence. While memories may fade and investigative challenges increase, carefully preserved biological evidence, comprehensive documentation, and advances in forensic science have allowed many investigations once considered unsolvable to be revisited with renewed effectiveness. DNA profiling has transformed criminal investigation, but its greatest strength lies not in replacing traditional detective work. Rather, it provides a powerful scientific foundation upon which investigators can build a comprehensive case supported by multiple forms of reliable evidence. For victims' families, the reopening of a cold case often represents more than a renewed investigation. It reflects the continuing commitment of the criminal justice system to pursue answers regardless of how much time has passed. Building a prosecutable homicide case decades after the crime requires patience, precision, scientific rigor, and meticulous attention to detail. It is a process measured not by dramatic moments, but by the careful accumulation of verified facts, each contributing to a body of evidence capable of withstanding scrutiny in court and bringing long-awaited accountability to crimes that once seemed destined to remain unresolved. The press conference is scheduled only after investigators and prosecutors determine that sufficient information can be shared without jeopardizing the ongoing judicial process. Television cameras line the room, reporters fill every seat, and microphones from local and national news organizations crowd the podium. Many journalists covering the announcement were not yet born when the original crime occurred, a reminder of how much time has passed since April Tinsley's murder first shocked the community. A senior law enforcement official opens the briefing by acknowledging the decades-long investigation and recognizing the dedication of generations of detectives, forensic scientists, crime scene personnel, prosecutors, and support staff who contributed to the case over many years. The official also expresses sympathy for April's family, emphasizing that the announcement cannot undo their loss, but represents an important step in the pursuit of justice. Investigators explain, in general terms, that advances in forensic DNA analysis played a critical role in reopening the investigation. They note that biological evidence collected and carefully preserved during the original investigation remains suitable for modern scientific testing. Officials further explain that investigative genetic genealogy helped generate an investigative lead, while emphasizing that genealogical research itself did not establish guilt. Instead, it directed investigators toward an individual whose DNA was later compared through established forensic procedures with the biological evidence recovered during the investigation. Questions from reporters focus on how a case could remain unsolved for so many years. Investigators explain that forensic science has advanced significantly since the late 1980s, and that technologies unavailable during the original investigation are now capable of analyzing evidence in ways previously impossible. They stress that the outcome reflects both scientific progress and the meticulous preservation of evidence by the original investigative team. Officials decline to discuss specific evidentiary details that may become relevant in future court proceedings. They avoid commenting on potential trial issues, possible motives, or matters not yet presented in court. Throughout the briefing, they reinforce a central principle of the criminal justice system. An arrest marks the beginning of formal judicial proceedings, and the accused is entitled to the presumption of innocence unless and until proven guilty in court. The briefing concludes with a broader message to the public. Law enforcement leaders encourage continued cooperation in unresolved investigations and emphasize that cold cases are not forgotten. They explain that agencies across the country continue reviewing unsolved homicides as forensic science evolves, recognizing that evidence collected decades earlier may acquire new significance through modern analytical techniques. The announcement ends not with celebration, but with a measured acknowledgement that while scientific advances have created new opportunities for accountability, the ultimate determination of guilt remains the responsibility of the court. Following the 2018 arrest in the murder of April Tinsley, the reaction across Fort Wayne and the surrounding communities of Northeast Indiana was marked by a mixture of relief, reflection, and renewed grief. The case had remained part of the region's collective memory for 3 decades, and many residents remembered not only the crime itself but also the fear that followed it. For many longtime residents, the announcement that a suspect had been identified through advances in forensic DNA technology came as a surprise. People who had participated in neighborhood searches, volunteered during the original investigation, or followed the case closely in 1988 recalled the profound impact the murder had on daily life. Parents who had once allowed children to play freely outdoors described how the crime permanently changed family routines, with many becoming far more cautious about allowing children to walk or ride bicycles alone. April Tinsley's family publicly expressed appreciation for the investigators who continued working the case over many years. Although the arrest could not undo decades of loss, family members indicated that identifying a suspect brought long-awaited answers after years of uncertainty. Their statements generally emphasized remembrance of April rather than focusing solely on the individual accused of the crime. Law enforcement officials also acknowledged the work of multiple generations of investigators. Detectives involved in the original investigation had retired long before the arrest, but many were recognized for preserving evidence and maintaining detailed case files. Officials emphasized that solving the case was the result of cumulative efforts spanning decades rather than the work of a single investigative team. They frequently pointed to the careful preservation of biological evidence as one of the key factors that made later forensic breakthroughs possible. The case also attracted national attention because it illustrated the growing role of forensic DNA analysis and investigative genetic genealogy in resolving cold cases. Criminal justice professionals viewed the investigation as an example of how modern scientific methods could complement traditional detective work. Many agencies cited the case when discussing the importance of reviewing unsolved homicides in light of advances in forensic technology. Within the broader community, the arrest prompted renewed conversations about other unresolved cases. Residents expressed hope that scientific advances might eventually provide answers in investigations that had remained unsolved for many years. At the same time, Law enforcement leaders cautioned that not every cold case contains biological evidence suitable for modern DNA analysis, and that each investigation depends upon the quality and availability of preserved evidence. Public discussion also highlighted the importance of evidence preservation. Investigators explained that decisions made during the original 1988 investigation, particularly the careful collection, documentation, and storage of biological evidence, allowed forensic scientists to apply techniques that did not exist when the crime occurred. This message resonated with both law enforcement professionals and the public, reinforcing the idea that meticulous investigative work can retain value across generations. The legal proceedings that followed shifted public attention from the investigation to the judicial process. Officials consistently reminded the public that criminal charges initiate court proceedings rather than conclude them, and they generally avoided discussing evidence beyond what had been formally presented. This approach reflected the broader principle that even in highly publicized cases, legal determinations are made in court rather than through public opinion. Ultimately, the community's response reflected two interconnected realities. The arrest brought a measure of resolution to a homicide that had shaped local memory for 30 years, while also serving as a reminder of the lasting impact violent crime can have on families, investigators, and entire communities. The case demonstrated that although the passage of time complicates criminal investigations, advances in forensic science, combined with the careful preservation of evidence and persistent investigative effort, can create opportunities to revisit cases once thought unlikely to be solved. The conclusion of a homicide trial does not necessarily mark the end of the judicial process. When a defendant has been found guilty or has entered a plea that results in a conviction, the court must determine an appropriate sentence according to the applicable law. During this phase, one element that may become part of the proceedings is the victim impact statement. While the investigation and trial focus primarily on establishing the facts of the crime and determining criminal responsibility, victim impact statements provide an opportunity for victims' families to describe how the crime has affected their lives. Their purpose is not to determine guilt, but to assist the court in understanding the human consequences of the offense when imposing sentence. In many legal systems, victim impact statements are authorized by statute or court rule. Although procedures vary by jurisdiction, these statements generally allow immediate family members or other legally recognized victims to explain the emotional, psychological, financial, and practical effects of the crime. They may be submitted in writing, presented orally in court, or both. The court considers these statements as part of the sentencing process while remaining bound by the governing sentencing laws and any applicable constitutional protections. Homicide cases present unique circumstances because the direct victim cannot speak on their own behalf. Family members often describe the lasting effects of losing a child, parent, spouse, sibling, or other loved one. Their statements may address changes in family relationships, emotional well-being, daily life, and long-term plans altered by the loss. In cold case prosecutions, these statements may also reflect the additional burden of living with uncertainty for many years before the case reached a resolution through the criminal justice system. The role of a victim impact statement differs fundamentally from the evidence presented during trial. During the trial itself, testimony and exhibits are introduced to establish whether the prosecution has proven the charged offense beyond a reasonable doubt. Victim impact statements, by contrast, are generally presented only after guilt has been established through a verdict or plea. They do not prove the elements of the offense and are not intended to influence the determination of guilt or innocence. Instead, they help inform the court about the consequences of the crime when deciding an appropriate sentence within the limits established by law. Courts typically provide guidance regarding the content of victim impact statements. Family members are encouraged to describe the effects of the crime on their lives rather than speculate about matters outside their personal knowledge. Statements often discuss emotional loss, changes in family routines, the absence of important life events that the victim was unable to experience, and the continuing impact of grief over time. In cases involving children, Families sometimes describe milestones that were never reached, emphasizing the enduring nature of the loss. Judges carefully distinguish between the emotional significance of these statements and the legal factors governing sentencing. Sentencing decisions generally require consideration of multiple statutory factors, which may include the seriousness of the offense, the circumstances surrounding the crime, the defendant's criminal history, applicable sentencing guidelines, and other legally relevant information. Victim impact statements contribute to this broader assessment, but do not replace the court's obligation to apply the law impartially. Defense counsel also plays an important role during sentencing. Attorneys may present mitigating information concerning the defendant, address legal issues affecting the sentencing decision, or argue for a sentence authorized by law that differs from the recommendation sought by the prosecution. The adversarial process therefore continues during sentencing, although its focus shifts from determining criminal responsibility to identifying an appropriate legal consequence following conviction. In cold case homicide prosecutions, victim impact statements often carry additional historical significance. Families may describe not only the immediate effects of the homicide, but also the decades spent without answers while the investigation remained unresolved. They may explain how technological advances eventually renewed hope, how investigators maintained contact over the years, or how the eventual resolution affected multiple generations of the family. Such statements illustrate the long-term human impact of unsolved violent crime while remaining distinct from the scientific and legal evidence that establish guilt. Victim advocates frequently assist families throughout this process. These professionals help explain courtroom procedures, provide emotional support, coordinate communication with prosecutors, and prepare family members for the sentencing hearing. Their role is particularly important in complex homicide cases where legal proceedings may involve extensive testimony, significant public attention, or emotionally difficult evidence. Modern criminal justice systems increasingly recognize that victims and their families have important interests beyond the determination of guilt. While the prosecution represents the interests of the state in enforcing criminal law, victim impact statements provide families with a structured opportunity to describe the personal consequences of the offense within the legal framework established by the court. This participation acknowledges that homicide affects not only the immediate victim, but also parents, children, siblings, spouses, friends, and entire communities whose lives are permanently altered. At the same time, Cortez remained committed to balancing victims' participation with the rights of defendants and the requirements of due process. Sentencing must remain consistent with applicable law, constitutional protections, and established judicial procedures. Victim impact statements therefore function as one component of a broader sentencing process rather than as independent evidence determining punishment. The growing recognition of victim participation reflects an evolving understanding of justice in homicide cases. Scientific evidence, investigative diligence, and courtroom procedure establish accountability under the law, while victim impact statements remind the court of the human realities that exist beyond forensic reports and legal arguments. Together, these elements illustrate that the criminal justice process seeks not only to determine responsibility for a crime, but also to acknowledge the lasting consequences experienced by those whose lives have been irreversibly changed. For many years, once a homicide investigation exhausted every available lead, it often entered a period of relative inactivity. Detectives had interviewed witnesses, processed the crime scene, examined forensic evidence, and pursued every reasonable suspect, yet the case remained unsolved. These investigations became known as cold cases, not because they were forgotten, but because no immediate investigative opportunities remained. Today, many law enforcement agencies address these cases through dedicated cold case units, specialized teams whose primary mission is to review unsolved homicides using modern investigative techniques and scientific advances. Unlike the original investigative teams that responded immediately after a crime occurred, Cold case investigators approach a case with the benefit of time. Although the passage of years presents challenges such as fading memories and unavailable witnesses, it also offers important advantages. Advances in forensic science, expanded criminal databases, digital record systems, and improved analytical methods allow investigators to examine historical evidence from perspectives that were impossible when the crime first occurred. The work of a cold case unit typically begins with a comprehensive review of the original investigative file. These files often contain thousands of pages of reports, photographs, witness interviews, laboratory records, search warrants, evidence inventories, maps, and correspondence accumulated over many years. Detectives do not assume that earlier investigators made mistakes. Instead, they seek to understand precisely what information was available at each stage of the investigation, which leads were pursued, how evidence was evaluated, and what questions remained unanswered. This historical review preserves continuity while identifying opportunities created by modern investigative tools. Evidence preservation plays a central role in nearly every cold case investigation. Biological samples, fingerprints, trace materials, clothing, and other physical exhibits collected years or decades earlier may remain scientifically valuable if they were properly stored and documented. Modern forensic laboratories frequently possess analytical capabilities that did not exist when the evidence was originally examined. Consequently, material once considered inconclusive may now yield useful scientific information. Decisions made by crime scene personnel during the original investigations, such as careful packaging, contamination prevention, and meticulous chain of custody documentation, often determine whether later forensic testing is possible. Advances in DNA profiling have fundamentally changed the work of cold case units. Early forensic techniques frequently required relatively large, well-preserved biological samples to produce useful results. Contemporary laboratories can often generate DNA profiles from much smaller or more degraded material using improved extraction methods and highly sensitive analytical technologies. When a DNA profile is successfully developed, investigators may compare it against appropriate criminal justice databases to determine whether a known individual has previously provided a matching sample under applicable legal authority. In cases where conventional database searches do not identify a suspect, investigators may, when permitted by law and agency policy, consider investigative genetic genealogy. This approach combines forensic DNA analysis with genealogical research to identify potential relatives of an unknown individual through genealogy databases that allow law enforcement matching under defined conditions. Importantly, genealogical analysis generates investigative leads rather than establishing criminal responsibility. Any individual identified through genealogical research must still be investigated using traditional police methods, and any forensic conclusions must be independently confirmed through standard laboratory DNA comparisons before they can serve as evidence in criminal proceedings. Cold case investigations rely upon collaboration among multiple disciplines. Detectives work closely with forensic scientists, crime analysts, prosecutors, digital specialists, and, where appropriate, professional genealogists. Crime analysts reconstruct historical timelines and geographic patterns. Forensic scientists reevaluate preserved evidence using current laboratory methods. Prosecutors advise investigators regarding evidentiary requirements and legal procedures. This multidisciplinary approach reflects the complexity of historical homicide investigations, where no single form of expertise is sufficient to resolve every question. Witness evidence also receives careful reassessment. Investigators may re-interview individuals whose observations remain relevant, compare historical statements with newly developed information, or identify previously overlooked witnesses through modern records research. At the same time, detectives recognize that memory naturally changes over time. Contemporary interviews are therefore evaluated alongside original documented statements rather than replacing them. This careful comparison helps distinguish first-hand recollections from information acquired through later media coverage or discussion. Digital technology has further transformed cold case investigations. Historical records that once required manual searches through paper archives are increasingly available through searchable electronic databases. Public records, newspaper archives, property records, census information, and geographic mapping systems allow investigators to reconstruct historical events with greater efficiency than was possible decades ago. Digital evidence management systems also facilitate collaboration among agencies by organizing large volumes of investigative material in accessible formats. Cold case units must also address legal considerations unique to historical investigations. Evidence must remain admissible under current evidentiary rules. Chain of custody documentation must demonstrate the integrity of physical exhibits, and constitutional protections applicable to criminal investigations remain fully in effect regardless of how much time has passed. Prosecutors frequently become involved early in the reopening process to ensure that renewed investigative efforts satisfy legal requirements governing future court proceedings. Despite technological advances, many challenges remain. Some evidence has deteriorated beyond scientific usefulness. Witnesses may have died or become impossible to locate. Crime scenes may have changed substantially due to development or environmental factors. Records may have been lost through circumstances beyond investigators' control. Cold case units therefore prioritize cases in which preserved evidence and available documentation provide realistic opportunities for renewed investigation. The success of modern cold case units has influenced investigative practices well beyond unsolved homicide cases. Law enforcement agencies increasingly emphasize comprehensive documentation, long-term evidence preservation, and regular review of unresolved investigations. Crime scene personnel understand that evidence collected today may be examined using technologies not yet invented. This perspective encourages meticulous forensic practices designed not only to support current investigations but also to preserve opportunities for future scientific advances. Cold case investigations demonstrate that criminal justice is often a long-term process rather than a single event. Scientific innovation alone does not solve decades-old homicides, nor does persistence by itself overcome every investigative obstacle. Instead, successful case resolutions emerge from the combination of careful original evidence collection, secure preservation, evolving forensic science, thorough documentation, multidisciplinary collaboration, and continued commitment by investigators who recognize that the passage of time does not necessarily diminish the possibility of discovering the truth. Through these specialized investigative efforts, cold case units have transformed the expectation that certain homicides will remain permanently unsolved, showing that evidence preserved with care can continue to speak long after the original investigation has ended. The resolution of the April Tinsley murder more than 3 decades after the crime has become an important example in discussions of modern cold case investigations. While every homicide presents unique factual and legal circumstances, the investigation illustrates several broader developments that have reshaped how law enforcement agencies approach unsolved violent crimes. Rather than representing a single technological breakthrough, the case demonstrates how evidence preservation, forensic science, interdisciplinary collaboration, and sustained investigative commitment can work together over many years to produce results that once appeared unattainable. One of the most significant lessons concerns the preservation of physical evidence. During the original 1988 investigation, crime scene personnel collected and documented biological material according to the forensic standards available at the time. Although investigators could not anticipate the precise DNA technologies that would emerge decades later, they understood the importance of maintaining evidence in a condition suitable for future examination. Secure packaging, careful labeling, contamination prevention, and complete chain of custody documentation ensured that biological evidence remained available for scientific analysis long after the original investigation had reached an impasse. The case also highlights the evolution of forensic DNA analysis. In the late 1980s, forensic genetics remained a developing discipline with capabilities far more limited than those available today. Modern laboratories can often analyze biological samples that earlier investigators could not fully utilize, producing DNA profiles from much smaller or more degraded material through improved extraction methods, amplification techniques, and analytical technologies. The April Tinsley investigation demonstrates how advances in laboratory science can expand the value of evidence preserved many years earlier. A further influence has been the growing recognition of investigative genetic genealogy as a valuable investigative tool in appropriate cases. When conventional DNA database searches fail to identify the source of crime scene biological evidence, investigators pursued genealogical analysis under applicable legal and policy frameworks. This approach generated an investigative lead that was subsequently confirmed through traditional forensic DNA comparison. The distinction between these two processes has become an important lesson for law enforcement agencies. Genealogical research assists investigators in identifying potential suspects, while conventional forensic DNA testing provides the evidentiary comparison used within the criminal justice system. The investigation also illustrates the importance of multidisciplinary collaboration. Successful cold case investigations increasingly depend upon cooperation among detectives, forensic scientists, crime analysts, prosecutors, digital specialists, and, when appropriate, professional genealogists. Each discipline contributes expertise unavailable to the others. Detectives reconstruct historical events, forensic laboratories analyze preserved evidence, genealogists identify potential investigative leads, prosecutors evaluate legal requirements, and analysts integrate large volumes of historical information into coherent investigative frameworks. The April Tinsley investigation demonstrated that effective communication among these specialties can significantly enhance investigative effectiveness. Documentation has emerged as another enduring lesson. Cold case investigations frequently extend across multiple decades, during which original investigators retire, agencies reorganize, and investigative responsibilities transfer to new personnel. Comprehensive reports, evidence inventories, laboratory records, photographs, interview transcripts, and investigative notes enable later investigators to understand both the evidence and the reasoning underlying earlier investigative decisions. Without detailed documentation, valuable institutional knowledge may disappear even when physical evidence remains available. The case has also influenced how many agencies evaluate unsolved homicide files. Rather than viewing cold cases as permanently inactive investigations, law enforcement organizations increasingly conduct periodic reviews whenever significant forensic or technological developments occur. Advances in DNA analysis, digital databases, fingerprint technology, imaging techniques, and other forensic disciplines may create new opportunities to examine historical evidence. Consequently, many agencies have established specialized cold case units dedicated to systematically reassessing unresolved investigations. Beyond its investigative significance, the case has contributed to broader discussions regarding public confidence in the criminal justice system. Families of homicide victims often experience years or decades without answers when investigations remain unsolved. The successful resolution of long-standing cases demonstrates that careful evidence preservation and continued investigative commitment can create opportunities for accountability even after substantial periods have elapsed. At the same time, law enforcement agencies emphasize that not every cold case contains evidence suitable for modern forensic analysis and that scientific advances cannot overcome every investigative limitation. The investigation has further underscored the importance of maintaining rigorous legal standards despite technological innovation. DNA evidence, genealogical research, and other scientific developments operate within established constitutional, statutory, and evidentiary frameworks. Investigators must continue to obtain evidence lawfully, preserve chain of custody, respect applicable privacy protections, and present scientifically reliable testimony in court. The effectiveness of modern forensic science therefore depends not only upon technological capability, but also upon adherence to fundamental legal principles that protect the integrity of criminal proceedings. Training within law enforcement has likewise evolved in response to cases such as April Tinsley's. Crime scene investigators receive increased emphasis on long-term evidence preservation, recognizing that material collected today may be analyzed using technologies not yet developed. Detectives are encouraged to maintain thorough documentation. Prosecutors increasingly consult with investigators during complex forensic investigations, and forensic laboratories continue refining quality assurance procedures designed to support both current and future criminal proceedings. The influence of the case extends beyond professional practice to public understanding of forensic investigation. Media coverage frequently portrays DNA as an immediate solution to criminal investigations, but the April Tinsley investigation illustrates a more accurate reality. Scientific breakthroughs become effective only when combined with meticulous evidence collection, careful preservation, comprehensive documentation, sustained investigative effort, and lawful judicial procedures. Technology provides powerful investigative tools, yet those tools achieve their greatest value within a disciplined investigative framework built over many years. Ultimately, the lasting significance of the April Tinsley investigation lies not in any single scientific technique, but in the convergence of preparation and innovation across generations. Evidence collected with care in 1988 remained available for technologies developed decades later. Investigators who inherited the case respected the work of their predecessors while applying modern analytical methods. Prosecutors and forensic scientists translated complex scientific findings into evidence capable of supporting legal proceedings. Together, these efforts demonstrated that while time may complicate homicide investigations, it does not necessarily diminish the possibility of discovering the truth. The case continues to serve as an important example of how perseverance, scientific progress, and professional collaboration can reshape expectations regarding the investigation of long unsolved violent crimes. The resolution of the murder of April Tinsley more than 30 years after the crime has become an important point of reference in discussions about the future of cold case investigations. Although it was one of several high-profile cases solved during a period of rapid forensic advancement, the investigation demonstrated how carefully preserved evidence, modern DNA technology, and interdisciplinary collaboration can transform an investigation that once appeared to have reached its limits. Its influence extends beyond Indiana and the United States, contributing to broader conversations among police agencies, forensic laboratories, prosecutors, and policymakers about the management of unsolved violent crimes. One of the most significant contributions of the case has been its reinforcement of the importance of preserving biological evidence. Long before sophisticated DNA technologies became available, investigators collected and stored biological material using accepted forensic procedures. Decades later, those preservation efforts allowed scientists to apply analytical methods that did not exist when the crime occurred. The case has since been cited in professional training and forensic education as an example of why evidence retention policies are essential. Many agencies have strengthened long-term evidence preservation practices, recognizing that material collected today may become more valuable as scientific capabilities continue to evolve. The investigation also highlighted the practical value of revisiting unsolved homicide files. Historically, many cold cases remained inactive after conventional investigative leads had been exhausted. Modern policing has increasingly shifted toward periodic case reviews, particularly when significant advances occur in forensic science or investigative technology. The April Tinsley investigation demonstrated that a case once considered stalled could acquire new investigative opportunities through improved DNA analysis and the careful re-examination of preserved evidence. This perspective has encouraged agencies in numerous jurisdictions to establish formal review procedures for historical homicide investigations. Another enduring influence involves the integration of forensic science with traditional detective work. Public attention often focused on DNA technology, yet the investigation underscored that scientific evidence alone does not resolve a homicide. Detectives reconstructed historical timelines, reviewed decades of investigative documentation, coordinated with forensic laboratories, consulted prosecutors, and evaluated new information within the broader factual context of the case. This multidisciplinary approach has become a model for many cold case units, emphasizing that technological advances are most effective when combined with careful investigative practice. The case also contributed to the broader adoption and discussion of investigative genetic genealogy. During the late 2010s, several prominent cold cases, including the identification of the offender responsible for the Golden State Killer crimes, demonstrated the investigative potential of genealogical research when combined with forensic DNA analysis. The April Tinsley investigation became part of this broader development by illustrating how genealogical methods could generate investigative leads that were subsequently confirmed through conventional forensic DNA comparison. At the same time, the case reinforced an important procedural distinction. Genealogical research serves as an investigative tool, while traditional forensic DNA testing provides the evidentiary comparison used in criminal proceedings. Law enforcement agencies have also drawn lessons from the investigation regarding documentation and institutional continuity. Cold case investigations frequently extend across multiple generations of investigators. Original detectives may retire, agencies may reorganize, and investigative responsibilities may transfer to new personnel. Comprehensive reports, evidence inventories, crime scene photographs, laboratory records, and interview summaries allow later investigators to understand not only what evidence exists, but also how earlier investigative decisions were made. The April Tinsley case demonstrated that thorough documentation preserves institutional knowledge as effectively as evidence preservation safeguards physical exhibits. Professional education within forensic science and criminal investigation has likewise reflected lessons associated with the case. Training programs increasingly emphasize contamination prevention, secure evidence storage, chain of custody procedures, and interdisciplinary communication. Crime scene investigators are encouraged to collect and preserve evidence with the understanding that future technologies may extract information unavailable through current analytical methods. Detectives receive instruction regarding the importance of detailed investigative records capable of supporting future case reviews many years later. The investigation has also influenced public expectations concerning unsolved crimes. Families of victims, community members, and policymakers have increasingly recognized that advances in forensic science may create opportunities to revisit investigations long after the original crime occurred. At the same time, criminal justice professionals consistently emphasize that not every cold case contains biological evidence suitable for DNA analysis, and not every investigation will benefit from genealogical research. Scientific innovation expands investigative possibilities, but does not eliminate the need for careful evidence evaluation, lawful investigative procedures, and corroborating information. Another important legacy involves collaboration across institutional boundaries. Modern cold case investigations often require cooperation among local police agencies, state laboratories, federal partners, prosecutors, academic researchers, and forensic specialists. The April Tinsley investigation illustrated how successful case resolution depends upon coordinated expertise rather than isolated effort. This collaborative model has become increasingly common as forensic investigations grow more technically sophisticated and multidisciplinary. The legal significance of the case has been equally important. Cortes continue to require that DNA evidence be presented through established scientific procedures, supported by documented chain of custody and reliable laboratory methods. The investigation demonstrated that even when modern technologies generate new investigative opportunities, constitutional protections, evidentiary standards, and judicial oversight remain fundamental components of the criminal justice process. Scientific innovation, therefore, operates within, not outside, the legal framework governing criminal prosecutions. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from the April Tinsley investigation is philosophical rather than technological. The case illustrates that a homicide investigation is not necessarily limited by the scientific capabilities available at the time the crime occurs. Instead, careful evidence collection, secure preservation, comprehensive documentation, and sustained institutional commitment allow future investigators to apply methods that earlier generations could not have imagined. This perspective has reshaped how many law enforcement agencies view unsolved homicides, encouraging long-term stewardship of evidence and continued investment in cold case review programs. Today, the April Tinsley investigation is remembered not simply because it was solved after many years, but because it demonstrated how modern criminal justice can bridge generations. Original investigators preserved evidence without knowing how it might one day be analyzed. Later forensic scientists developed technologies capable of extracting new information from that evidence. Detectives and prosecutors integrated scientific findings with traditional investigative methods to build a legally supportable case. Together, these efforts illustrate a broader transformation in homicide investigation, one in which persistence, scientific progress, and professional collaboration have expanded the possibility of resolving crimes that once appeared destined to remain permanently unsolved.